If you never change your perspective, you'll fall for the same old tricks every time. Ask any magician. Good day, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Monday Morning Moments with Mark. I hope this finds you well. So, as you saw in the open, this week we're going to talk a little bit about perspective. And I want to say that it's different than when I talked about in episode 19 when I talked about perception. And I'll get into comparing perception and perspective, how they're different, and how one actually shapes the other. And we'll get into all of that. But before that, we always have to have the funniest thing. The funniest thing this week comes, again, courtesy of my good buddy Josh. He was actually trying to smart me up on something I didn't know was going on in the world, and apparently there's some wild outrage about Cracker Barrel choosing to offer a vegan sausage option, and I don't really understand what the deal is. I didn't know that the Cracker Barrel menu was that important to people, and it was such a closely guarded to the heart type thing, but, whatever. I'm not going to get into that whole debate about that. If you think the menu items that Cracker Barrel offers is something worth raging about, then you're probably part of the reason I quit going to Cracker Barrel too. So, anyways, so he's telling me, he's trying to talk about some of the, like, justify Cracker Barrel as Southern cooking and talking about some of the things that they offer that he likes. And he goes, but I would not eat their collard greens. And I said, if your impression of an allegedly Southern cooking establishment is, I wouldn't eat their collard greens, then that tells you everything you need to know about choosing to eat there. Thankfully, Waffle House doesn't offer collard greens, and we didn't have to have that debate. So, anyways, that actually is two parts of that really get into perspective. And his perspective of whether or not Cracker Barrel truly is a Southern home cooking place, and whether or not, like, what qualifies that from an individual perspective, and basically that's kind of a bit more of, it could be a perception based on what you see, but if you haven't tried a certain thing that you say qualifies as Southern cooking, then you might not have the perspective to be able to make that assessment. And then the whole, like, perception and perspective versus the menu thing, I don't want to get into that, but it is what it is. But that's definitely a matter of perception and perspective. So in episode 19, when I talked about perception, perception is the way we interpret what is put in front of us, whether with whichever of our five senses. And that is shaped by our perspective. So perspective actually, and changes in perspective actually enables a perception change. And the example that I want to use for that is a magician in the audience. When you're sitting in the audience, the way that a magician does tricks gives you a certain perception that he just sawed a lady in half or whatever the trick is. But if you were, say, behind the magician or backstage or somewhere from a different vantage point, you would see it completely different. The smoke and mirrors and everything that make great illusion from the front view of the audience completely changes if you're from a different perspective. So the perception that you get changes based on what your perspective is. And the reason that I bring this whole thing up, and why did I want to talk about perspective this week, other than the fact that Josh and I actually had a couple good conversations about different examples of how perspective can change your perception of something, is because changing your perception is a matter, or sorry, changing your perspective is really a matter of experiencing the same thing from different angles or different settings. And another example of this is there's a ride, the new Guardians of the Galaxy ride plays different songs. And the first time I rode it, I only heard one song. And the second time I rode it, it was the same song. I didn't know there was a different song. So when you hear a different song, it actually changes the entire experience of the ride. And when my son and his girlfriend went on the ride, they were telling us about it. And I was like, wow, I'd like to hear that. So it changes your perception of what's going on around you. So when we take that and apply that to bigger picture life, and more important life things than riding roller coasters and whether or not to eat at Cracker Barrel or not, or going to a magic show, we talk about our actual life experiences and understanding cultures and understanding the perspective of another person, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. It changes our perception of not only them but also of their circumstances, and that's critical in helping us build empathy. And as I've said before, empathy is part of forgiveness and helping build understanding, and it helps build bridges and allows people to communicate, all the other things that come from that. But it's super important to be able to do that is to change your perspective, change the way that you experience different things in your life in order to gain a broader and deeper perception of how they impact you and how they impact the larger world. Because if you never change your perspective, you'll fall for the same old tricks every time. Ask any magician. So, hope you guys take some steps this week to experience some things from a different perspective and see how it changes your perception of the world. Have a great week.